We are now in the breakfast room at the astronaut quarters, where the STS-31 crew is having breakfast. Colonel Charlie Bolden, the pilot on this mission for the Space Shuttle Discovery. T-minus 10, go for main engine start. We are go for main engine start, T-minus 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
Mission Control, Houston.
Roll program. Roger, roll, Discovery.
The roll maneuver puts the vehicle in the proper launch plane.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. So there I was, which is how all great aviation stories start. This is episode 36, titled A Couple Gorillas in Your Chest.
That's crazy. Who would put gorillas in their chest?
Who would do that?
Right?
What
Apparently
a great...
that's what it feels like when you're accelerating downrange in a space shuttle.
This is an amazing interview. Another first for us, first astronaut, right?
Right.
Hopefully one of many. And I hope we get to have him on again because we just got cut short of time. And He had so many stories.
Retired Major General Charlie Bolden, United States Marine Corps, call sign Panther, took us through the early years flying attack jets in Vietnam, going to the Naval Academy. And the interesting thing about that, Fig, he was not the least bit interested in flying. He had gone for a flight when he was a kid and wasn't impressed. He wanted to be a grunt.
That's right.
Then he spent a couple nights in the cold woods of Virginia in January, and he went, maybe an indoor job isn't so bad after all.
Flight school sounds pretty good.
It does. Yeah. So this is a fascinating one, folks. We're not going to bore you. Panther is a font of knowledge. He actually went on to become the administrator of NASA. We'll have him back and talk about that. In the meantime, sit back.
Don't sit on the ejection handle.
On the tanker.
Enjoy it. Here it comes, episode 36.
Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fun.
So there I was.
That's how every great aviation tale begins. This is Repeat here in New Hampshire, and I'm here with my co-host, Fig.
Hey, I'm in Kansas City for a few more hours, and I am really excited to say we have with us today Panther. Welcome, Panther.
Good to be with you. Thanks very much.
So, Panther, a very distinguished guest today, and we've been very excited to have you on. So, thank you very much. Graduated from the Naval Academy, flew more than 100 missions in the A-6 Intruder in Vietnam in combat, test pilot. Flew one of those squirrely airplanes without an engine called a space shuttle on 4 occasions.
It had an engine. It had a bunch of engines.
Well, yeah, but once they went out, they didn't relight. At least they weren't supposed to. And then ultimately the NASA administrator. So great to have you here with us, Panther. Can you tell us, first of all, when you were a little boy growing up, the Apollo program was in full swing as you were in your high school years. What did you ever get to think you were going to get to do that? And how'd you get interested in aviation? And
I never had any interest in going to space, and I never had any interest in aviation. In fact, at the age of 8, I had actually gone up in a light civil airplane with a couple of my classmates. One of my classmates' father was a Tuskegee Airman, and he owned a little Cessna or something. I don't even know what it was. And, growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, he kept it at the local airfield at Owens Field. And he took 3 of us up to fly one day, and I came back totally unimpressed. And as time went on, I said, okay, when I graduated from high school and finally got accepted to the Naval Academy, which is another story for another day, I knew 2 things. That's all I knew. I knew I was not going in the Marine Corps under any circumstances because I thought Marines are crazy. Living in Columbia, we saw the young graduates of recruit training come up from Paris Island and destroy the park in my city. And so I did not want to be a Marine. And the second thing was I was not going to fly because I had that one experience. And I'd been in commercial airplanes, but nothing else. And I just thought flying was inherently dangerous. And I used to tell people my mother didn't raise a fool. So those were the only two things I knew when I went to the Naval.
Beautiful.
And that just didn't seem to work out based on your awesome aviation career.
Didn't work out at all for a number of reasons. My first company officer, and you all know what a company officer is, but for some in the audience who may not, it was the one commissioned officer each company at the Naval Academy, and at 4,000 person brigade. Back then, it was divided into 36 companies, and each company had a commissioned officer who oversaw these 150 young midshipmen who literally ran the brigade. But my company officer was Major John Riley Love, a young, energetic infantry officer who I got to know and respect and idolize. And he was only there my first year, and I didn't see him again until after I graduated. But graduation time rolled around, and I looked back and I said, I can fly airplanes, I can drive ships, I can do anything, but I want to be like Major Love. I want to be an infantry officer, and I want to go to Vietnam and defy the law of averages for the life expectancy of a second lieutenant. That's how fiery.
Oh my gosh.
So that got me to the Marine Corps. And then, as you both know, it got me to Quantico for the basic school, and everything went well until my 3-day war at the end of basic school. End of November, early December, it was cold and freezing and snow and ice on the ground. And I don't like cold. And I was afraid that if I laid down in a sleeping bag and put my head down, I'd die of hypothermia. So I volunteered for fire watch for 3 days and did not sleep, and came back from the 3-day war and told my company officer, then it was Lieutenant Colonel McElroy from somewhere in Alabama. I said, Colonel McElroy, I said, I don't want to take my aviation option out of the Naval Academy, but I changed my mind. I'm going to Pensacola. So I went to
sunny Florida.
First time I got in a T-34 and we took off, and I could not believe it. I mean, just the feel of lifting off the ground was mesmerizing, and I fell in love with aviation immediately.
That's awesome.
You know how you're impressed by different people. I was drawn to the A-6 Intruder because of the mission. Ended up doing that. And one of my instructors in flight school had been another Marine, Pete Field, down in Kingsville, Texas, who was an F-18 guy, or at least was the program manager for the F-18 in development, had flown F-4s. And he got me interested in being a test pilot. So that became the next thing I wanted to do. And it took years to do that, but got there, and eventually got drawn toward the space program, not to it, but toward it.
Okay.
I met the late, great Dr. Ron McNair, who was another black kid.
Right. Yeah.
From South Carolina. We did not know each other, but he was selected in the first group of shuttle astronauts. And I met him, and he asked me if I was going to apply for the program. I told him, not on your life. And he looked at me real strange. He said, why not? You got everything. I said, Ron, they'd never pick me. And he said, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. How do you know if you don't have? And he embarrassed me more than anything else, because I'd forgotten what my mom and dad, what all of our parents tell us all the time. You can do anything you want to do if you set your mind to it and you're willing to study and work. And I'd forgotten. Right. So I went home and told my wife I was going to apply for the space program. I said, I don't stand a snowball's chance in hell, but I got to put an application in. And that led to my getting nominated by the Marine Corps and interviewed by NASA and then getting selected. So
how about that?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Quick question. I'm making an assumption, and I shouldn't. You went to test pilot school, obviously, so you had some kind of engineering background from the Naval Academy?
That's another story of how good failure can work out sometimes. I graduated. My class was the first class that was allowed to select majors. They didn't have any majors before that. Everybody was a naval oceaneering or something like that.
Okay.
So we were allowed to select majors, and I wanted to be an electrical engineer. So I took all the courses required, and then my junior year, I was an honored student, wearing stars and all kinds of stuff. And I had to take 2 courses called Electromagnetic Waves Theory 1 and 2.
Ow.
That sounds bad.
I struggled through 1 with a C. They only had one professor at the whole Naval Academy who taught this. And he and we were never going to see eye to eye. So second semester I started, most of the folk in the class were smarter than I was. So they didn't even come back for the second semester. I struggled through the second semester, got an F, which although I was an honor student, I had to go before the academic board, because you get an F at the Naval Academy and you're going to the academic board and they're going to determine whether or not you should stay.
Right.
Wow.
So the admiral asked me why I was taking the course. I said, I want to be an electrical engineer. It's required. And he said, okay, well, let us deliberate for a little while. We'll call you back in. And I came back in. They said, okay, because you've been so good in academics up until now, we're going to give you an option to expunge that F from your record so you can retake the course. And I stopped him. I said, Admiral, I could take this course for the next 11 years and I'd get 11 Fs. I said, I'll take my F and I'll just accept my minor in electrical science. So I have the engineering background, but not the degree to show for it.
Okay. So that was not a showstopper then, getting into test
pilot. It was not a showstopper.
I always thought you had to have an engineering degree to get accepted to test pilot.
You do not. We have horticulturists. And the one thing about, test pilot school, you got to have 1,000 hours of high performance. Well, it depends on what community you're from. You have to have a 1,000 hours of flight time. And but the engineering degree is not required. You've just got to be able to demonstrate the fact through your performance in the fleet that you've got the wherewithal to be able to pick up the curriculum.
Gotcha.
I mean, I had some agronomy majors and stuff like that. So
I applied, I don't know, 4 years in a row and never got it because I figured, well, I didn't have an engineering degree. Everybody said, you got to have an engineering degree. Obviously, I was just a moron and they didn't want me.
Well, I got you beat. I applied, I think, 6 years in a row, and that's twice a year, as you remember.
Yeah.
And I finally, when I came back from Vietnam, I recruited out in Los Angeles. I was an OSO. And it gave me an opportunity to go to Southern Cal, to USC, and I got a master's degree. And that's all the Marine Corps wanted. It just, I got a master's in systems management, which was sort of a hybrid between an MBA and an engineering degree. And so he accepted me and sent me to test pilot school. So I'm like you, I couldn't get in.
Geez. So I've got a fork in the road. I've got two questions I want to ask you. I guess the first one is, I think you were gone from NASA by this time. Did you ever run across Dave Brown, Dr. Dave Brown?
Dave Brown was a good friend. Dave was
good. Okay.
Dr. Dave was awesome.
Yeah. Dave and I went through Beeville together.
Never served in the office with him, but everyone that I ever talked to after the Columbia accident, they sang his praises. He was probably second only to, you ever hear of a guy named Sonny Carter?
Yes.
Sonny was another flight surgeon, aviator. He was, he was always winning the top stick when he was with Trip Trey on the USS America as the flight surgeon.
Right.
I can't think of anything that Sonny didn't do well. So I served with Sonny in the office before he was killed in a civilian, going from Houston over to Augusta, Georgia or something on a commercial.
Right. He was killed in that commercial air crash, I think, with Senator Tower.
Senator Tower.
Yeah. So. So Dave and I went through Beeville together and got Wayne together. What a prince, what a gentleman, and fun to be around. And I went down and watched the launch. For whatever reason, I did not go back down to watch the recovery and take my son. I'm grateful I did. And so I was just curious if you would ever cross paths with him. What a nice man and a terrible loss. And Sonny, I guess, was his mentor because he had been a flight surgeon. And Dave was like, well, I'm a flight surgeon. Maybe I can count on my detailer and send me to flight school. And lo and behold, he did it. And kind of the reason I asked him, as I recall, Dave had, I think, 3 attempts before he got selected into NASA. And he was getting kind of discouraged, like, I'll never make it. And they're like, they just generally don't in those programs take you in on the first go rounds. But I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about Vietnam.
Yeah, well, that was you stole my thunder.
There you go. Stole your thunder. Yeah. So I'm just curious, you find yourself over there. You didn't have to worry about the cold. That was for sure.
Oh, no, not at all.
So do you have anything that you can share with us? What it was like first combat mission? I imagine a lot more night missions in the Intruder than not.
We started out and I need to understand, did both of you fly Harriers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So when I got there, Nixon had already withdrawn all American forces from Vietnam. I got there in the summer of 1972, so relatively late in the war. And what they had done was they had taken 2 F-4 squadrons, 115 and 232, had cycled them back from their bases. I think 115 was up in Iwakuni, and 232 may have been on Hawaii, but they came back into a place called Nampang, Thailand, the Rose Garden. And 533 came down from Iwakuni, and 4 CH-46s for search and rescue, and 2 C-130s so the F-4s could get to the war because they couldn't make it from Thailand to Vietnam and still drop bombs. So we had 2 C-130s that escorted them to and from all the time. But we flew out of the Rose Garden. First few weeks, we flew mostly day, circle the wagons, day VFR, circle around, drop, and that stuff. And then gradually we worked ourselves into night flying. And then a few months in, we did almost all night ops, interdiction up into North Vietnam, and just kind of left the bomb dropping down south to the F4s. Ended up spending a night once right before the war, before I left the next year in July of 73 in Bien Hoa, where there were 2 American units. There was 211 and 311 flying A4s at the time. So I spent the night in Bien Hoa and could not wait to get out of there, because they were, you may remember, right off the runway at Saigon, Tan Son Nhut, and they were getting rocketed. That we weren't getting rocketed in Thailand. We were drinking beer while they were getting rocketed. So I wanted to get back home, but I had a hydraulic failure and had to divert into there, and they fixed me up.
Nice.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
Okay. Wow.
But if you were asking about I was scared to death on my first mission, because we'd already lost an airplane. My very first day in the squadron, I went out on an orientation flight, and we flew over. Things were so quiet down south. There was no threat of MiGs. There was no anything. We didn't have any big AAA. We didn't think. And so things were pretty calm down south of the DMZ. And they flew me up and down the DMZ, or I flew while somebody gave me the tour. We flew over Khe Sanh and then came back and landed, and people were really somber on the flight line. And we got out and said, "Hey, what's happening?" They said, "Well, we just lost an airplane." And I went, "Oh shit, I just got here." And it turned out we had an airplane shot down over Khe Sanh, and the word that we got was that it was a 57, which just didn't make sense, because we didn't think anything bigger than a Zu-23 was down south. But it actually shot the wing off the airplane, and as it was going down, they saw one shoot, and saw that person being kind of carted off by the Vietnamese, the North Vietnam, Vietnamese, hiking up to Hanoi. And that was one of those times when Intel got it wrong, because the word we got was that the guy that was alive was the pilot, Lenny Robinson, who was a guy about one of your heights, I imagine, blonde, big, thick guy. The bombardier navigator was a guy by the name of Al Kroboff. And Al looked like something out of, a horror show. Big, tall, gangly guy, had played basketball for the Citadel, wore horn-rimmed glasses and everything, couldn't see in front of his face. And it turned out almost 2 years later, when we had our first squadron reunion in Nashville, our CO was the OIC of the Naval ROTC unit there. And he said, "Hey, I got a surprise for you." And the door opened, and in walks Al Kroboff, the guy that we had been told was dead. And it turned out Lenny Robinson, the pilot, never got out of the airplane. So totally different people. And we never understood how the intel report was wrong. But Al Kroboff survived a year or so in Hanoi, and then got out and came back, got out of the Marine Corps, and went back home to New York and became a grave tender. His mom and dad ran a cemetery, and he ran the cemetery for the family until he passed a few years ago.
So the aircraft that got shot down was over Khe Sanh, had been there. You passed over it first?
I had been there just before they got there to fly their bombing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And because, all we were doing was touring. We didn't have any bombs on the airplane. We didn't have anything. It was just a tour.
Area familiarization.
Yeah. Area fam.
Let's go to the test pilot. Then you got to fly A7s, EA6s, which is the 4-seat version. Oh, hang on.
Okay.
Big time.
So another
Fig. I went too far ahead. Sorry, David.
No. This is on my list of things I got to ask. And you just asked it, but I got to know this. So was it Navy Test Pilot School, Air Force Test Pilot School? Did you have?
I went through the Naval, and we are very particular. It's the Naval Air Test Center and Naval Test Pilot School. I don't care what the Navy.
Excuse me, sir.
No. It's not you. It's the Navy that likes to say Navy, but it's not Navy. Naval. It's the big school because we're the only school in the world that trains fixed wing, rotary. We have rotary wing. So Air Force only does fixed wing because they claim to be the aerospace test pilot school. They prepare people to go to space. We prepare people to be test pilots. And,
there you go.
Just a slight difference.
Nice.
The only other place you could go and do a rotary wing curriculum was the French test pilot school. You couldn't even do it at the Empire Test Pilot School. So we got people from all over the world through Pax River, which made it really great. And so the rotary wing curriculum was dominantly Army and foreign officers along with the Marines. And we had a couple of Navy guys, who flew H-60s or back then, whatever else they were flying. But we had flight test engineer, fixed wing flight dynamics, systems, which was guys out of A-6s and systems related airplanes, S-3s, stuff like that.
Okay.
And then rotary wing.
I think I know what the hardest part of test pilot school. So I'll ask what the second hardest part. The hardest part being which you had to decide which 2 hours you're going to sleep each night so that you could study. Seriously, what was the hardest part of test pilot school?
Without a doubt, the academics and show you how people make a difference. I thought I was not going to get out of test pilot school when I found out that one of the courses we were going to take was electromagnetic waves theory.
Ruh-roh.
And I went, ruh-roh. I said, I've been to this show once before. But the guy who taught it was a guy named Jim McHugh, who was a young engineer who mainly taught rotary wing flight dynamics, but he was the one guy who taught electromagnetic waves theory. It was a breeze. He made it seem like, you were in elementary school and it was ABCs. So I found that sometimes it's not the student,
right?
That the teacher has a lot to do with how well or if the student learns. And I breezed through the same thing that I had flunked out of at the Naval Academy because of
what?
I just had an absolutely superb professor.
You see, I've always found that too. If you get a professor or a teacher that's interested in going, hey, look at this. This is really cool. And here's some of the fun stuff you can do with it. And here are the building blocks. Not putting the equation up on the board, solving it, and go, okay, now you do it.
Well, Panther said he was never going to see eye to eye with the
right?
professor that taught at the academy.
But McHugh made it real simple in the beginning. He said, look, my job is to teach you. And if you're not learning, it's my fault. So tell me what it is that you're not getting, and I'll figure out another way to do it. And I'll come in after hours. I'll do whatever you need.
Wow, that's great.
Very seldom did anybody need stupid studies because he just said, look, let's get it right up front. My job is to teach you. You're smart and you can learn this stuff or you wouldn't be here. So let me help you grasp whatever it is I'm teaching. That's my job.
Teachers with that attitude.
And he was awesome. Everybody loved Jim McHugh.
Okay. How long does test pilot school take?
It's a year. And then you graduate and you go. And you can go anywhere from there. You can go, most of us stayed at Pax River, but you can go out to Edwards. You can go overseas. Some people went to black programs. So they went to places like Tonopah or Nellis or whatever's close to Nellis, Area 51 and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's, you just kind of go from there to places.
And so I'm gonna lead you down this path just real quick for the listeners that aren't familiar. So test just don't always test new aircraft. Sometimes you test new weapon systems and software, things like that. Correct? You
perfectly led me down the path because I was an engineering test pilot. I was not an experimental test pilot. So the two big categories are experimental test pilots. The Air Force is getting ready to fly the B-21. And I read an article just the other day where they're picking contractor and Air Force test pilots to put in the B-21 program because they're going to be the experimental test pilots. They'll be flying a brand new airplane that nobody's ever flown before. When we flew the Harrier, we had a couple of guys that were put into the experimental test pilot program with the Harrier, and were put into experimental test pilot program with the F-18. And we always have at least one guy who goes in there, but the vast majority of us are engineering test pilots. My job, since you mentioned it, I was an ordnance test pilot. And so I flew all known airplanes. We weren't worried about the flight dynamics. We were worried about the performance of a bomb coming off the airplane or a rocket. We wanted to make sure the bomb wasn't going to impact the airplane when it came off. So we were looking at separation, and we went through very progressive steps of altitude and airspeed increases to clear for, you all remember the weapons charts and all that stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So we built those tables.
I was a weapons and tactics officer for the squadron, and so I was real familiar with.
Yeah, you knew how to use the tables, unlike most other people. Who said
they made good coasters for your coffee cup?
They do. Yeah.
Who said, okay, well, how many mils do I put in the gun sight?
Right. Exactly.
I have a vague. It's triggered a memory. I remember. I had a videotape of there. It was a weapons test.
Yeah.
And it was a big bomb, probably a Mark 83 or 84.
Was it coming off of a TA-7?
It was coming off of an F-18, and there was an OA-4, like flying chase, and there was another airplane filming this, and the bomb came off and did some crazy octaflugeron and took the wing off the A-4.
Yep.
Have you ever seen that, or were you involved in that?
I've not seen that one, but I have actually seen others. We were flying a weapons test, and it was a separation test trying to evaluate the tables that we had flown in Vietnam, because we had a couple of airplanes we had lost, and we suspected it was where the bomb had recontacted the airplane, and we saw it drop one day. They were training Mark 82s off 500-pounders, and they were just concrete shapes.
Yeah, silly bombs.
But the guys started separating, and all of a sudden, the first two that came off got caught in the airflow under the wing and turned sideways, and then boom, 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 just beat their way down the fuselage of the A-7 until they cleared the back of it. So that you got to see all kinds of interesting stuff. I actually I was carrying just a dummy. It's one of these cruise missiles, and I was going out, and my flight was just captive carry to see how many G's you could put on the airplane and how much could it stand. And I did a turn, and all of a sudden I heard this whoomp, and the front lug had broken. Oof. And all of a sudden I had this big long shape. It was like a tomahawk. Mm-hmm. And I had this big long shape now dangling down in front of my wing, held only by the rear lug. And
how fast were you get just cruise speed or delivery speed?
About 500 knots or so at the time. And so, we slowed down, got a wingman and everything. They said, you're in bad shape. We don't know what you're going to do. So we said, we probably ought to jettison it. We got all the experts on the radio and all the ordnance experts. And they said, whatever you do not jettison, because you'll probably take your wing off if you try that, to do what you talked about. The shape is now hanging down, the wings here, and the shape is hanging down like this. So they said, if you try to jettison it, it's probably going to come loose and come right up and take your wing off.
Right.
So they said, what we're going to do is we're going to de-rig all the gear on the runway. And we want you to come in and we want you to make this really flared landing. I mean, as slow as you can go and flare, and then gradually let the nose down. And we'll pray that it doesn't hit any crack in the runway, and things will end right. And sure enough, they did. I brought it back and came to an end. It never even hit the runway, but it was, the rear lug was pretty tight. And so it was hanging there, and ordnance came out and took it loose and all that kind of stuff. But I've had a lot of different things happen. I had a snake eye when I was flying a Hornet out at Miramar, and flying for the Black Knights, the 314. And we were out at 29 Palms doing a close air support, and dropped my first bomb, and all of a sudden airplane just really yawed around, and I went, holy shit, something's not right.
Right.
I said, hey, call my wingman, said, hey, can you take a look and see what's going on here? And he said, oh, buddy, I got bad news for you. The first bomb, when the snake eye fin opened prematurely and cut the retaining strap on the bomb next to it, so you're carrying a snake eye open on that wing, and that's why you're yawing. So, and you ever seen a snake eye fin open? The size of it?
It's huge, isn't it?
Massive.
Only on video.
I'm flying around with the snake eye opened under my wing.
It's always happened behind me.
That's right. And so that time I was really lucky. They didn't want me to go anywhere where humans were. So they were trying to figure out where to go. And in the meantime, the flight controller from LA Center said, "Hey, would it help if I gave you a tanker?" I said, "Man, if you can do that, because we don't know how long it's going to take them to decide what I need to do." And the final decision was to send me into North Island, because North Island was sufficiently, out of the way of other stuff. And they did the same thing, de-rigged all the gear on the runway. The tanker took me to San Diego and dropped me off. And I did a straight in to North Island, and landed and rolled out. And they came out and took this doggone 500-pound bomb with these wings on it and everything. But I mean, you could see the fuel gauge going down.
Oh, sure. Barn doors worth of drag hanging back there.
Yeah.
So there I was.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Oh,
okay. So that's two ordnance things. What else? Oh my gosh.
I live a charmed life.
Yeah.
So have you ever had your hand on the ejection handle?
Never.
Okay.
I'm not flying anymore, but I'm going to knock on wood anyway, because I
let's
having these these fits of angst wanting to go fly again. So I'm knocking on wood here.
Oh my!
Holy cow, that's awesome.
How long did you do that? How long were you an engineering test pilot? How many?
I was only there for 2 years. And then I got selected for the astronaut program. That was okay. I met Ron McNair while I was a test pilot, and my time there was cut short because I was foolish enough to apply for the program and interview, and they were foolish enough to select me. So I was in the class of 78 and spent 2 years at Pax River, and then became a member of the class of 80 and down in Houston in the astronaut office.
Class of
Second
80.
group selected for the space shuttle.
Wow.
So you got to go 4 times, but they didn't just go, "Okay, you were a test pilot. Here you go. Hop on that baby there and take her for a spin." How long is that training program? And what would most people find surprising about astronaut training?
And you were active duty Marine Corps while you were in NASA astronaut
all the way
training.
through. I spent 14 years in the middle of my career getting promoted with my contemporaries, because we got fitness reports and everything else.
Okay.
We have had people not be promoted. It doesn't happen very often, but I got promoted along with my contemporaries. I went there as a major lieutenant colonel selectee, and it took a couple of years, to pin on my lieutenant colonel stars, oak leaves, or whatever leaves they are. But there was a couple of Air Force guys, and we were wondering who was going to take the longest to be promoted, because promotion was really slow back then. But we went through a 2-year candidacy.
Okay, 2 year.
And what people would be surprised would be to find out how basic the training is from an academic standpoint, because you have people from all backgrounds.
Okay.
Some not pilots, some have never been in an airplane. And so everybody does everything together because they're trying to build this class camaraderie and stuff. So everybody takes fundamental aerodynamics, meteorology, oceanography, geology. And that was the fun part, because they take you out to the Grand Canyon for a week and put you in an SUV with a geologist from the University of Texas and a case of beer. And
that's pretty awesome.
He says, "I'm driving, you drink and listen."
All right.
and we went all over the Grand Canyon and everything. So it's fundamental.
That's it. Fig, we're astronauts.
Hey, let me tell you, it is fundamental education to bring everybody up to the same level. Now, today, I would not be an astronaut. I just came back from my reunion, and listening to these young astronauts today, they go through a 2-year candidacy like we did. We had reduced it to a year, but it has now become so complex that it takes them 2 years, because, they're going through high-level academics. They go through the fundamental stuff. They all get sent, the non-pilots or non-aviators get sent to Pensacola and go through the T6 curriculum up through the safe for solo flight. They don't fly a solo, but they go up through the safe for solo. So they've gone back to the way they used to do it in the Apollo days, where everybody was sent through flight school. They were all sent through Air Force flight school, got their wings, their Air Force wings or whatever, or equivalent. And so they all flew the T-38 from the front seat. These guys, they can fly the T-38, but they're not rated pilots, but they've got the flight training and everything.
Okay.
Today.
Okay. So just so I'm straight on this, everybody that was in your class, were they all aviators, or did that class include just scientists that wanted to be astronauts that weren't going to be?
There were 21 of us in my class, 19 Americans and 2 Europeans. So we had the first 2 European astronauts to become members of NASA's astronaut corps. And they were still ESA astronauts. And of the 19 Americans, half of us were pilots or NFOs, and the other half were civilians. So we had 3 MDs, medical doctors. Most were engineers, and a couple of them were scientists. I mean, pure scientists, like astronomers, astrophysicists, you name it. And almost all of them had been on an airplane, but it had been where they went off and paid for, private pilots rating and stuff because they thought it was going to help them become an astronaut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So some big brains in there. Sounds like
that's why I thought I would never be selected. And when I went down for my interview, it's a week-long process, and we all arrived about half. They select 200 finalists and divide you into groups of 20, and you go down for a week at a time. This is the way it used to be. And so we all arrived in a little Clear Lake City airport, a little puddle jumping airport, and we're waiting for the bus to come, all 20 of us. And the test pilots there, being like test pilots with big watches, said, "Hey, why don't we introduce ourselves?" And it was a chance for all of us to brag about who we were and stick our chest out. And so we went around, and the last person to introduce himself was a guy who became my lifelong friend, a guy named Franklin Chang Diaz, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz. Franklin was born in San Jose, Costa Rica, came to America to be an astronaut. That's what he told his dad. I got to go to the United States to become an astronaut.
Wow.
Almost flunked out of the University of Connecticut because he didn't speak English, taught himself English, went on to graduate with honors, went to MIT, earned a PhD in plasma physics. And today he is the founder of a rocket called Vasimer. Just keep that in your mind, because one of these days Vasimer is going to be flying people to the stars. It's incredible. So we're going around and everybody else bragging about what kind of fighter pilot they were and attack pilot. And Franklin very sheepishly raised his head and he said, "My name is Franklin Chang Diaz. I am a plasma physicist." And I paused for a moment. And I looked, I said, "Franklin, you work with blood?" And Franklin's head went down. And I think in his mind, he said, "You got to be shitting me."
Right.
The interview for astronaut office. This guy thinks that plasma, the only plasma is blood. I'm working with high energy stuff. And he's asking me if I work with blood. But we later became very good friends and all that stuff. So
that's funny. Well, I would have asked the same question. What is, what?
Dave, he went on. Halfway through our candidacy, he actually went on the David Letterman show. Before he went, I said, "Franklin, okay, let me give you a couple of hints here. David Letterman is a comedian. Okay, so he's going to humor you, and but don't get sucked in." I said, "David Letterman is not interested in plasma physics or anything." And so we all gathered around the television, and the last person he introduces, he says, and okay, it's now time for our very special guest. This is an amazing individual who is a NASA astronaut, and I'm going to bring him out now. Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz, come on out, Franklin. And Franklin came out, and he's smiling, big smile on his face. He sat down. The first question David Letterman said, "Say, Dr. Chang Diaz, it says here you're a plasma physicist." And Franklin said, "Yeah." Said, "You work with blood?" And
geez.
Franklin's eyes kind of went down, but then he perked up because he remembered that Charlie Bolden told me this guy was a comedian. So that's where he was. I'm not sure I stood any higher in his eyes after going through the David Letterman show, though.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Great story.
So I got like 17 questions
at least,
and rapid fire. I'll try.
Well, no, because if I start asking them all, we're going to be here for a week, Panther, and I can't do that to you. So, 2 years in the candidacy at NASA, and then they is there a omni vortex? You get anointed.
There is an omni vortex. You have your winging, so to speak. They give you your little silver astronaut pin, which says you're now a full-fledged astronaut, not flown. That's the difference. The silver is you're still an astronaut candidate in most people's eyes. In my eyes, definitely. And once you fly, you get a gold astronaut pin that flies with you in space. So we got our little silver pins, and you go off and you're assigned to some of the experienced astronauts in the office, and that's your on-the-job training. You're an apprentice to an experienced astronaut until you get assigned to a crew.
And so how long from the time you got your astronaut pin, you graduated at the candidacy course, until you
strap on a shuttle?
I was actually assigned to my crew about 2 years after finishing the candidacy, but I didn't fly until 4 years after. We graduated, so to speak, in 82, and I flew my first flight in January of 86. We had been scheduled to fly any number of times going back into, say, the mid 1985, and then finally we even changed flights one time, and then we were scheduled to fly in December of 85. Went to the pad, aborted at T minus 14 seconds. So we got down to 14 seconds, and
oh my gosh!
And they said, "Okay, stop." They thought there was something wrong with the hydraulic power unit that drove the nozzles on the right-hand solid rocket booster. Turned out not to be a problem because everything's computers. It's all software. You were talking about that before, and turned out to be a piece of debris on one of the little computer cards in that solid rocket booster, but they didn't know that until they removed the computer and the hydraulic power unit from the ass end of the rocket. We went home for Christmas and then came back and had 3 more launch attempts. And then finally on the 5th attempt, laying there thinking we weren't going to go, we went. But we were really relaxed.
Right? It's never going to happen. Been here, done this. Now, that time frame was very close to Challenger, right? Wasn't Challenger January 86?
We launched immediately prior to Challenger. So both vehicles were on the pad at the same time. In fact, our launch was the day after they went through their practice launch. So they were down at the Cape, and they went through, they got into the vehicle and went through the practice launch like everybody does about a couple of weeks before you're scheduled to fly. You go all the way through the countdown and do everything except light the engines. And so they came down. They were all very good friends. And so they came back. We landed on the 18th of January, and they finally launched on the 28th. And that was the day we lost Challenger.
Right.
Well, I know exactly where I was that day.
So do I. I was driving through the back gate at Cherry Point. I was a Hawk missile platoon commander at Cherry Point on my way back from Chow. Horrible.
Okay. I want to talk about something positive.
Happy stuff. Yeah.
Now this is
yeah, now maybe he is gone. So yeah. So I don't know. I think he was going to ask what's that like when it does kick you in the pants, because I don't know, a 777 puts out 90,000 pounds of thrust aside. I think the shuttle puts out somewhere in the order of millions of pounds of thrust. I could be wrong.
Yeah, you got to remember though how much mass it's pushing.
Okay.
So your engines on your 777 or your 737, relatively speaking, the proportion of mass that they're pushing is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of what my 1.5 million pounds of thrust. Well, actually, it's more than that, because you get 1 million pounds out of each solid rocket booster. Okay. So you got about 4 million pounds of thrust pushing a 7 million pound vehicle into space. And the old force, the old F equals ma equation says it's about a G1/2. So
really?
When you release the brakes on a 777, and we all slide back in our seats, that's roughly what we feel when we lift off in the shuttle. Now, what you don't get in a 777 is it shaking like it's about to come apart. When the
You're not supposed to anyway.
You get this go, boom. You hear and feel the solids ignite. The 3 main engines, it's just a poof, poof, poof. And it causes the vehicle to shake a little bit. And it actually, because it's held by 4 bolts on each of the 2 solid rocket boosters. So you got these 8 bolts about this big around that are holding up this 4 million pound stack.
So about 6 inches across in diameter.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so it does what we call the twang. It tilts over because the engines aren't pointed straight up and down. They're pointed at an angle, and it tips over until they get caught by the bolts, and then it springs back. So that's the twang. And everything's timed to let the computers check out all the systems in the shuttle. If everything's good by the time it gets back to straight up, signals go to the 2 igniters on each solid rocket booster and go. You get this explosion that you hear and feel. I mean, it just literally, it just shakes the living crap out of you. And it vibrates as you lift off from the pad, and it lasts. I mean, that vibration lasts as long as the 2 solids are on there. So for the first 2.5 minutes, I mean, the vehicle's just shaking going uphill, and it's hauling ass though, because the solids have one purpose in life, and that's to get you up and out of the atmosphere. So, because the atmosphere is not where you want to be with a very fragile spacecraft.
Yeah, lots of drag and everything else on there
the wind's
too.
Changing and all that kind of stuff. If you can imagine you and your 737 getting bounced around, you're getting bounced around because you're going through airflow that's just turbulent. We're getting bounced around because we're going through constantly changing direction and force on the air as you go up.
Sure, the wind is shearing across your flight path, instead of with
the wind shears, it'll literally break the vehicle apart. So the wings, believe it or not, the wings have a good purpose on the shuttle. The wings are constantly moving. It's a fly-by-wire spacecraft, and so back in the old days, they preloaded what they thought the wind conditions were going to be based on the weather balloons, and so it moved the wings around to offload the vehicle as it went through all these wind shears, so that the vehicle didn't break apart.
Wow. Just thinking of some big brains there that figured out how all that worked.
Oh, yeah.
So how long is it? I imagine it's not long. How long does it take until you go supersonic on the launch?
Oh, you're supersonic less than a minute. So you clear the tower and you're supersonic at about 50 seconds or so. When people, I was not at the Cape when we launched SLS a couple of weeks ago, but everybody said it was unlike anything they had ever seen or experienced in their lives. Nobody knew how much thrust, what kind of damage that amount of thrust was going to do. It blew the doors off the elevators on the launch pad. It did all kinds of stuff, but in shuttle, you're going pretty fast. And SLS is the same way. It has so much thrust for the weight of the vehicle that it just sprang off the launch pad. Apollo, if you remember watching Apollo launch photography, it seems like it just hovers there. And it really was. It was literally trying to burn off propellant as it went up. So it was too heavy for the thrust on the engines until it had burned off some propellant. SLS and spacecraft of today, they're not like that. So we just literally sprang off the pad.
Okay, so when I look at an airplane vintage 1915, 1920, I go, how do they have the stones to go up in that thing? I imagine you're looking at the Apollo aircraft going, how did they have the stones to go up in that thing?
All you got to do is look at your watch.
Right.
And recognize the fact that there is more memory in your watch than they had, more computing power in your Apple Watch or whatever watch you have. Right. That Don Glenn had going in, our first orbital mission.
Can you believe
and
that?
The more I learn about that, I say, those guys had huge.
All right. Stones.
Yeah, it is terrifying. In fact, I had there was a series done. I think it was called What They Saw, and I don't remember now the name of it. I'll try to look it up during one of our interludes here.
Repeat here. The publisher's note is. The podcast I'm referring to is known as Apollo 11, What We Saw, with host Bill Whittle.
He talked about it. I did not realize that Neil Armstrong was talking about I think it was like a 214 error or a 201 error. And he's trying to talk back to Houston. They lost a computer due to a buffer overrun just as it rotated so that the lunar surface was now out of view. And he's about 2 Empire State Buildings above the surface of the moon with no computer going, hey, NASA, what are you going to do about it? And I think the podcast announcer was saying, this is about as close as you'll ever hear Neil Armstrong coming to full on panic.
Exactly. Because the crew had never seen that. The funny thing is, as we go back and look through the archives and everything, and I think I may have seen the same thing you did, but there was a young woman in the back room who during the training and the simulations, they had this alarm occur several times. And so she had gone through her NATOPS and she found out that that particular alarm is exactly what you said. Don't worry about it. It's just a buffer overload. It'll recover. So it is not a safety of flight issue. And she tried to get people to tell the crew that in training, and all the smart men said, "Nah, don't worry about it. Don't even worry about it." And sure enough, as Armstrong's in the final throes, about to run out of gas, actually, they get this 1201 or 1202 or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And the good thing was, one of the guys who was on console had listened to her, and he told the flight controller, "Flight, ignore it. They'll be okay. Everything's all right. Keep going." And so they told Neil, "Keep going."
How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was on a layover in Orlando. It was an evening launch, and my hotel, I had a sliding glass door and a little patio on like the third floor. And I noticed that there was a group of people starting to gather in the parking lot facing east. It was facing east towards the Cape. And so I had the TV on at the countdown, and it was 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 launch. And I kept looking out, and I didn't see anything. And then as soon as it cleared the launch pad, I looked east, and there it was. I could see it in the distance. And so here's my takeaway from that. Having never seen a launch, how fast it happened. And in my mind, it was just going to go straight up and out of sight. And what it did was it went up. And then when it got up, the sun lit it up. Now I saw the solid rocket boosters come off with my naked eye. And then instead of it just going out of sight, it kind of turned north and went over the horizon. And I thought, well, I thought it was just going to go straight up in outer space and be gone. No. And it was.
It only goes straight up for the first 2 minutes. That's like I was saying, that the purpose of the solids is to get it out of the atmosphere. It's closed loop. There's nothing you can do. It's flying itself. The wings are moving, fluttering, because it's been told what the winds are going to be. And so it's adjusting so that the vehicle doesn't get broken up. And for 2 minutes and some odd seconds, the solids burn and get you up out of the atmosphere. And when they separate, it gets really calm. I mean, the vehicle just stabilizes, and it feels like you're in a giant car going down the smoothest freeway you've ever been on. And that's when it does start to bend over, because it went for altitude first to get you out of the atmosphere. And then you got to get to a certain velocity to escape Earth's gravity. And so it very slowly starts to pitch over and go for altitude. I mean, for airspeed. So if you look at at the displays and everything, it goes up and then starts to go over, and it actually comes back down for just a little while. It's like you getting ready to do some aerobatic maneuvers and stuff, and you kind of run out of airspeed and you want to pick your airspeed up. So you just kind of pitch over and then come back up again. That's what we do. It kind of pitches over, gains airspeed, so it starts to go down, what we call downrange.
Downrange, okay.
So you'll see that it gets farther and farther away from the launch site as the launch goes, and it's going much farther in distance than it is in altitude, whereas before it was almost all altitude, because it's trying to get speed and distance away from the launch pad. So that's why you can see it forever. You can actually see, on a good day or a good night especially, you can see the main engines cut off. On a Falcon 9, you see the first stage separation, and then you see the second stage ignite. And I think on Falcon 9 you can actually see the second stage go out, because that's like 8.5 minutes downrange. And with the naked eye on a good clear night, it's like a star in the sky, and then all of a sudden you see the star go away.
The other thing I'll mention,
cool.
I watched Columbia go up from 3 miles away. The concussion of the noise hitting you in the chest and in the face was it was without a doubt the most powerful thing I've ever seen in my life.
And how far away did you say you were?
I think we were 3 miles from the launch pad.
Imagine being the doors of the elevator on the launch pad. That's what happened when SLS launched. That same acoustic energy, just the sound from the rocket. It wasn't any, I mean, it's sound is energy, and it boom, it just blew the doors off. I mean, it's,
that is wild. So, and I didn't know that either. That's kind of cool.
That's why they don't let us fly supersonic over ground.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Because you don't want to be breaking people's windows.
And start breaking stuff.
Right. Panther, when the solid rocket boosters come off, and you said it feels like you transition from kind of I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't remember
Turbulent?
exactly how you described it. But do you feel deceleration, or is it just a change in the like the flight characteristics? Like you go from a little bit of light turbulence to smooth air.
You don't feel a deceleration as much as you do. It's like going from violent turbulence to smooth air instantly.
Wow.
The solids separate, and it's like you and your 777, boy, you just went through the most violent turbulence you've experienced flying a 777. You go, holy shit, what are we in? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it gets smooth all over you. That's I mean, it happens. It's like boom, solids separate, and it just gets smooth.
And is it smooth all the way into?
It's smooth the rest of the way until about 45 seconds prior to the main engines cutting off. And it only takes, you only take 8.5 minutes to get to space. So the main engines burn, and it makes no difference whether you're talking about a Falcon 9 or an SLS. It's about 8.5 minutes to get you out of the atmosphere, going orbital velocity, and the main engines cut off. When that happens, now that's a dramatic change because the vehicle has burned off most of its fuel. So it's now gone from a 7,000-pound vehicle to essentially a 200,000-pound orbiter, because you've gotten rid of 1 million pounds of thrust and 1 million pounds of mass with each of the solid rocket boosters. You've gotten rid of the external tank, or you're getting ready to get rid of it, which had 1 million pounds of liquid propellant in it. And you're now just essentially this 200,000-pound booster is still being pushed by 1.5 million pounds of thrust from the main engines. And we throttle them back as much. It's like you pulling back on the throttles so you can start descending. We pull back on the throttles as far as we think you can safely go on rocket engines, so as to limit the amount of G, but we can't get it below about 3 Gs. But it's all through your chest. So you're accustomed to 6, 7, 8, 9 Gs when you pull it, but that's through your head. That's longitudinal G. We're getting it right through your chest, and you've never experienced that before in all probability. And it's like having a couple of gorillas in your chest for 35 seconds. So you're just kind of
would be like a continuous cat shot.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then when the thrust stops, you just pop up against your straps, and for all intents and purposes, you're floating. Gravity is you're still in this gravity environment, but it's overcome by the centrifugal force created by the speed of you going around the planet.
Now, how was, I guess I'll refer back to what's always lovingly referred to as the vomit comet, where they take you up and do parabolic flight to get you used to 0 G. How long does it take to customize in space, or do some people just wear the Dramamine patch the entire week? Or
most people adapt in about 2 days, maximum of 2 days. To my knowledge, we've had a few people who just never fully adjusted. I mean, nobody's vomiting the whole time,
right?
And very few people, to be quite honest, get physically sick where they to the point where they're throwing up.
They just feel a little green.
Feel a little stomach awareness or a little lightheaded or other kinds of things. Everybody experiences what we call space adaptation syndrome to some effect, and it's because everybody. It's physics. When the fluids come up in your body, I mean, your head just feels full. So it's like you've got the worst head cold you've ever had in your life, because all this fluids in your head. You look down here and your blood vessels are distended in your neck and up here in your temples, and you go to the bathroom and you pee for 2 days, and you get rid of about 2 liters of fluid that you don't need, and everything gets back to normal. So the body is amazing at adapting to
that. Is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Hey, one other quick thing I wanted to ask you about launch. So sometimes they'll scrub a launch for a launch window. In fact, I think it was Titan or Titus or something like that. Just finally splashed down yesterday. It was missing launch windows. Can you describe what a launch window is and why it's hard to calculate? And why it scrubs a mission sometimes?
They're not hard to calculate. And it scrubs them. For example, if you're going to rendezvous with the International Space Station, the most efficient way to do it, and you can think about it like an airplane, is you want to catch the space station going overhead, and you want to launch right then.
Shortest possible distance, right?
The shortest possible distance. That's the closest you're going to be to it. And so you want to launch when it's right there, 250 miles away, and then you're going to use speed to catch up with it, you're going to fly lower than it is. And, orbital velocity or orbital mechanics says if I fly lower than something, I'm going faster around Earth. So
you're making a smaller circle than it is.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you fly out in front of it. And then gradually you can just let yourself, as you get higher and higher, you slow down until you end up rendezvousing with it. So that's the way you run the rendezvous. And so that's why you hear them refer to they have an instantaneous launch window for a mission going to the International Space Station. If you're going to another planet or something like that, the launch windows get longer, but it's always you want to launch when it's going to be the most efficient time to get to the target that you're eventually going to.
Sure.
Some of them had unlimited launch windows, and they were limited only by how long they thought the human being could stand on his or her back. And that was usually we got to 2 and 3 hour launch windows, and you said, okay, that's it. We were on our backs for about 2 hours on the next to the last scrub before we launched. And it was because we were in the middle of a thunderstorm that just wouldn't go away, and lightning and thunder and everything. And after about 2 hours, they said, hey guys, this is a losing proposition here. This storm is not going away. And so let's just get these guys out of the vehicle before lightning hits it and blows them up.
So here's I don't know if you can put an exact quantity to this, but I think you can get us close. So you fly a space shuttle mission, and that mission lasts, what's an average space shuttle mission last?
Toward the end, we were flying 13, 14, 15 days.
Okay.
We were going to the International Space Station. And so you could fly that extra time because once you docked a station, all your consumables, your oxygen, your water, all that stuff was coming from the station. So you weren't having to produce it. A normal shuttle by itself could fly 8, 9, 10 days.
So let's just keep the math simple. It's a 10-day shuttle mission.
Yeah.
How many days, weeks, months, years did you train before that 10-day mission?
Back in those days, it was usually about 2 years.
Wow.
So, you were assigned to a crew, and that began your training sequence. And the first 9 months to a year was mostly standalone training. And so it's like you and your crew in the simulator doing everything, going through all the emergencies and all that stuff without the help of a ground team. And then as you got into that second year, you started getting what we call integrated simulations, where you brought in the ground team, and then the training was really focused on the ground control team, the flight control team in mission control. And so you had been training, so you were very familiar with the failure modes and everything, but you were taught, okay, don't show anybody how smart you are. Just wait. The ground will tell you when to do something. Don't get ahead of them. Don't go grab the malfunction book and start working stuff. Tell the ground that I got a failure. You're not, and they would tell you, here's a news break. You're not telling them anything they haven't known for days. Because they can look at an oscilloscope and graphs, and they have known that you were going to get this alarm like 2 days ago. And sometimes they'll tell you, we want you to go to system B because you got a slight leak in this, and we don't want to trip an alarm. So go to hydraulic system 2 or whatever it is.
Okay.
But every once in a while they missed it and you got an alarm, and they said, okay, don't do anything.
So you're training for 2 years for a 10-day mission. And while you're doing this training, you are keeping proficient flying. You got NASA T-38. So how often do you fly, and what's that take to stay proficient?
It depends on whether like I was in the squadron. I was always a flight time hog, so I tried to fly 2 or 3 times a week.
Right on.
Okay.
I tried to fly as often as I could, and even if it meant taking somebody somewhere. I was a taxi driver, so you had a mission specialist, a guy or girl who needed to go to train somewhere, but they couldn't fly themselves because they weren't rated pilots. So, they'd say, hey, you need some time. I'd say, I sure do. Can you take me out to Denver, or can you take me out to San Francisco?
Yes, I can.
Look at your schedule, say, yes, I can.
There you go. I'll make it happen.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I generally flew 3 times a week or something like that.
Nice.
And then you could, if you wanted to, we did cross countries the same way we did in the squadron. You they'd let you take a T-38 and go away. You want to go home to visit family or something like that. You just sign the airplane out and go off on a cross country. Make sure you went into military bases or places that had the stuff you needed and the security. And you were
Sure. And then so you would just go fly, get your approaches and landings and whatever you needed to do to stay current, maybe go do a little acro if you felt like that, right? Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice. Can I have
every once in a while, guys would, you weren't supposed to, but every once in a while, guys would sneak off and go to somewhere like Yuma. And they had a friend who was, at Top Gun or something else. And they were looking for a dissimilar airplane. So you go out and
get a little 1v1.
Do a little 1v1 and then hope you didn't get put on report.
Very cool.
That was a no-no back then.
Whoops. So you go, well, I guess they didn't want to lose.
That's a lot of
lose an astronaut in an ACM flight. That's a lot of money down the toilet because
that's a lot of training. That's a lot of training that just ended up in the in Star Wars Canyon. So
they learned a lot of these lessons with the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo guys.
Those guys weren't wild men or anything,
because a lot of them, they were wild and crazy guys. They lost a couple of airplanes, guys trying to one-leg it back from LA or trying to one-leg it somewhere, running out of gas and having to jump out of the airplane just short of the wall.
Go read Chuck Yeager's book or The Right Stuff and see those guys were wild men, and it was incredible. But, yeah. So back to space briefly. So your first mission was a comm satellite, I read, and your second one was the Hubble telescope. What can you tell us goes into that that would surprise somebody that doesn't understand what it takes to get a shuttle in the air and get it launched into orbit, I guess?
I think, when you talk about a mission like Hubble, Hubble was one of these, we didn't have when you talk about launch window. So difference between Hubble and everything else, Hubble was going to its own orbit. So the launch window for Hubble was generally based on time on the back for the crew. There was no, nothing constraining our launch window, but what was constraining was once you got Hubble out of the payload bay, once we used the mechanical arm, the robotic arm, the Canada arm, we use that to lift it out of the payload bay and then put it above the shuttle, put its solar arrays out because it needed its power. It was on orbiter power until we pulled the umbilical, the electrical plug, and then pulled it out. So we had 6 hours of battery time that it could stand on its own, and we put it up. Unfortunately for us, we had trouble lifting Hubble out of the payload bay. The mechanical arm, geniuses up at MIT and Draper Labs and everybody else had designed the control laws for the mechanical arm such that, in microgravity,
so you got
the telescope doesn't weigh anything, movement. But it's still a 25,000 pound mass. But control law, exactly. So the control laws were such that when we pulled back on this translational hand controller, it was supposed to just lift the telescope straight out. There were some things that were not exactly correct in the control laws. So when Steve Hawley pulled back on the stick, it not only started coming out, but it started twisting and yawing, and we went, whoa, because there wasn't a lot of room. I could stick my fist between the side of Hubble and the longeron, the inside of the payload bay. So we didn't have a lot of play. We really needed to lift it straight out. So Steve had to do something called downgrade or down mode into single joint operations, where he individually selected one joint on the arm to move at a time. So what was supposed to take him about 15 minutes to lift Hubble out took us a little bit more than an hour, because he was doing it one joint at a time, and tweaking it out. We got it out and put it up. First solar array went out, no problem. Second solar array went out about 16 inches and stopped. And so we spent the rest of the day trying to figure out how to get the solar array to deploy, because if it didn't work, Hubble was going to die. That's how critical it was. It was getting some energy from the partially deployed and the fully deployed solar array, but not enough to keep it alive. So time became our enemy. And they finally figured out that it was, you talk about software again, there was a little software module, a little piece of logic in the telescope that was called a tension monitoring module. Its purpose was to keep the solar arrays from ripping themselves if something physically hindered its rolling out. And the tension monitoring module actually malfunctioned because it sensed that there was some tension and there wasn't any there. So after several hours, a young engineer at Goddard said, hey, I don't think we got a real problem. I think it's the software. So if you'll allow me to no-op the software, I'm going to take it out. And the flight controller went, you want to do what? He said, if you're wrong, what's going to happen? He said, well, if I'm wrong,
we don't do anything, we're going to
lose the telescope. Because the solar array is just going to rip itself to shreds. Yeah. But if we don't do anything, we're gonna lose the telescope. So he said, but I'm confident I'm right. And the funny thing was Bruce McCandless, who is now passed, but Bruce knew everything there was to know about the space telescope. He was on my crew, and you know him. He's a naval aviator, Vietnam era guy, but he was the first
picture of that yesterday. Yeah, so untethered spacewalk
the very first time. Oh, that's the iconic picture. That's Bruce McCandless. And so he said, when the solar array didn't go out, he said, I think it's the tension monitoring module. And the rest of us on the crew looked at Bruce. We said, Bruce, what the F is a tension monitoring module?
Well, if you were a plasma physicist, you'd know, but.
Yeah. He said, it's just a software module we put in to keep the solar array from destroying itself. And there's nothing wrong. He said they just should no-op the tension monitoring module. Several hours later on the ground, they came and said, we think it's the tension monitoring module. The rest of us looked at Bruce and went, you asshole. How did you know that?
Yeah, how did you know that, you bastards?
So I think the standard civilian question would be, so why don't you just put on spacesuit and walk out there and fix it? How much harder is a spacesuit spacewalk than people think?
The obvious question, very hard. But however, because we weren't confident we were going to get it solved by any other means, several hours earlier in the day, Bruce was a smart cookie. So Bruce and Kathy Sullivan were our EVA crew members, our spacewalk crew members. Both of them were veteran spacewalkers. And early in the morning, they decided, just in case something comes up, we want to start getting dressed. I mean, everything's going to work right. But just in case. So the first thing they had to put on was a pair of long johns. We call them, they look like long johns, but it was a liquid cool ventilating garment, LCVG. And it was a set of long johns with hundreds of feet of rubber tubing running through it that water flowed through to keep them heated and cooled as necessary once they were out in space. So they were in their LCVGs before we even started the deploy operation. So they didn't have to worry about that. And as we went along, the ground control team said, hey, we're not confident we're going to get this solved. Why don't you start getting Bruce and Kathy suited up? So my job was to suit them up. So I left the flight deck, went down and went in the airlock with them, got them suited up. We started depressurizing the airlock and we got them down. We were probably minutes away from having them at vacuum, being able to open the hatch and go out and manually roll out the solar array. We had actually practiced that. We had flown over to Bristol, England, where British Aerospace had designed and built the solar arrays. And all of us had a chance to pull out this little crank and manually crank out the solar arrays. So we were confident we could do that. We didn't want to do it because it meant once you manually cranked it out, it meant that the automatic control of the solar arrays was now gone forever. So it meant that, future kinds of things you might want to do, you're going to have to always go out and do a spacewalk, and you didn't want to have to do that.
Go ahead, Story. You got to go to release the furlers and a go to transfer Hubble to internal power on time. Roger that. Understand. Go for furler release and go for transfer to internal power on time. That's firm. And status for you, Houston. Charlie's downstairs in the process of getting Bruce and Kathy buttoned up in the suits. AVA copies, and we're watching the fans come on. Houston, Discovery, looks like motion stopped with just about one panel showing. And we see that too, Lauren. The DCE is off.
This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here in Mission Control Center discussing an impending deadline. Within about 13 minutes, we will reach a point of having concluded the pre-breathe, and in order to provide enough rapid response time to support an EVA, we would need to begin depressurizing the airlock in about 12 to 13 minutes from now.
The other thing I need an answer to is if I can go ahead and commit the EVA with a thought of going out and cranking it out. If whatever they're about to do fails, they want us to just press on to back them up. We need to get on with it.
Okay, flight, I'll come back with the answer.
And I need answers now.
Flight FAO.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable waiting until after
I don't either.
6:20.
That's why I want the answers now.
Yeah, 6:20 is my drop dead time from adding up all the times.
Okay, I'm going to have them press on. All right, Capcom, tell the crew we want them to press on into EVA, and we'll stop them whenever we have to. Just quickly, we got 4 minutes on this pass. Discovery, Houston.
Discovery, go ahead.
Okay, with the panels that you've got out there right now, it's not satisfactory to stay overnight. So we're going to have to move out on the EVA. Discovery, Houston.
Discovery, go ahead.
We think there may be some problem with the tension monitoring software. We've got the DCE back on. We're going to disable the tension monitoring and resend the proc to deploy the minus SDM.
Okay, hit it. Okay, Houston, we see motion.
We've got the image down here, Lauren.
And Houston, we think it's stopped.
It's fully deployed. The micro switches confirm it.
Okay.
And for Bruce and Kathy, we'd like you to stop the airlock depress at 5, please.
Another quick question about that spacewalk and vacuum. Does that air vent overboard?
It does. It just vents overboard. And then what you do is when they come back into the airlock and close the hatch, you take air from inside the cabin. What you're doing is you're pumping more air out of the oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen tanks out in the payload bay. You're pumping air into the cabin, and it's pumping it out into the airlock so that you bring the airlock up to normal atmospheric pressure, 14.7, just like we have down here. And everything's back to normal again. And they
How long of a process is that, Panther?
about an hour to repress. It doesn't take very much time to decompress, to depressurize, as you might add. They just open a little hole, and
it goes out pretty quick.
It goes out very quickly. Yeah. And they, back in the old days, they had to pre-breathe. So they'd wake up in the morning and they'd put on a mask and they'd pre-breathe 100% oxygen because you want to get all the nitrogen and other kinds of stuff out of your blood.
So you don't get the bends.
If you're a scuba diver, you don't want to get the bends, and you get the bends. Think of scuba inverted. So you're at pressure inside the shuttle. So that's like being at the bottom of the ocean, and you're going to go back up to the surface. When they go out in space, that's their surface. So they're going from pressurized to no pressure. In scuba diving, we go from extra high pressure to normal atmospheric pressure. So, and we just didn't want them to have the bends like scuba divers get if they come up too quickly or do other
quickly. Sure. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So, okay. Well, sadly, we're getting close to the end of the time. Panther, will you please come back with us?
If you let me come back, I'm happy.
Oh,
I got some.
There's no let to it.
I didn't tell you my favorite A4 story where I thought I was going to kill myself.
Let's close with that then.
Yes.
Well,
close with that.
I've told you about. I'm a person who loves to admit my mistakes because I don't want other people. It's like my son. He's a Wizzo in F-18s before he retired, and he got mad with me one day, and he came in and yelled. He said, "It's not fair." I said, "Che, what's not fair?" He said, "We can't do any of the stuff you did." I said, "That's because we were stupid, and we learned in blood, not to do the stuff that we don't let you do." So there I was in a TA-4 at Pax River. I was a test pilot. I was with, and I'm trying to remember Benji's last name, but Benji was an A4 guy, and he was in the back seat. I was in the front, so I was flying the hop. And we had some spare time, so we started doing aerobatics, and I'm in the middle of a loop. And you all will remember because you flew A4s, and we had the slats.
Yeah, aerodynamic
Last
slats.
thing you want to do is when you're at the top of the loop, relax the stick because the slats might flop out on you, and then it's a bad day. And so I'm at the top of the loop, and I don't know what I did, but I relaxed the force on the stick just a little bit, and all of a sudden, I mean, we just flipped and we got in a spin, and I said, we're gonna die. And
yeah, the A4 did not have
not built for spin recovery.
No.
So
No.
and what happened was I immediately, because I hadn't really strapped in as tight as I should have, I immediately was pushed up against the canopy. And I mean, it took everything I could to reach down, and I could just get my hand on the top of the stick, to try to just find neutral position with the stick. And I'm yelling at Benji in the back, and he's going, I can't reach the stick. I can't reach the stick. And I said, well, we're going to die. We're going to die. And I finally managed to push myself down low enough that, I got the stick and kind of felt around and got it to someplace neutral. And all of a sudden, the airplane just kind of slowed itself and stopped, and we were able to roll inverted. And we went immediately to the bar. And celebrated having cheated death one more time. So there I was, somebody get ready to go home and tell my wife, we're sorry to inform you, but your husband was an idiot and put himself into an inverted spin and PA4.
Do you recall what altitude it was that
we were really up there? Otherwise, we'd have never made it. Because I think
thank goodness.
I want to say we recovered about 6,000 feet. We were
my
way past ejecting, so we knew we were going to die.
Oh yeah. Wow. Well,
but
I'm
I was
glad
young,
you
and
didn't.
back then I was young and foolish. You got to remember, I was a captain.
Sure.
I was bulletproof. I mean, there was nothing that I couldn't do.
Yeah. No, can't kill me.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Thank you.
That is awesome.
I have 15 questions that you're going to have to come back to answer because I've got a long list. I
want to ask what the future of space flight is. I want to hear all about being. Last question, and I think this is a quick answer. What was the best job you ever did?
Oh, best job I ever did was just squadron pilot. But I don't know, maintenance control officer in 533 in Thailand, Vietnam, because I worked night shift with a crew, and I got to see Marines at their best. I love that. That was better than anything else I ever did. I was a young first lieutenant, and I remember being under an A-6 one night trying to help I asked this young Lance Corporal to show me how you remove. He was going out to remove an APU, and I said, "Show me how you do that, and then can I try?" And he gave me a wrench, and all of a sudden I could feel the presence of the maintenance chief. This master, and he said, "Lieutenant, get your ass out from under my airplane." and as a lieutenant would do when the master gun said, "Get your ass out from under."
Aye, Gunny.
Yes, Master Guns. All right, Top.
Remember, you're a pilot. He's the maintenance guy. He's not going to try to do your job. Don't you try to do his.
There you go.
He's not going to be pushing buttons in your cockpit. Get the hell out from underneath his.
Get out from under my airplane.
Well, thank you for your service, Marine. That is
Semper Fi. You all take care. Fly safely.
And you as well. I'm going to close it out here, and then we'll hang up. Wow, what a fun show.
I'm sad. I'm immediately sad.
Yes. Everybody that's listening on Rumble, if you could do me a favor and subscribe to this channel, please, because once we get 100 subscribers, we no longer have to pay to broadcast. Thank you to our sponsor, RobinsBirdBrainDesigns.com. Go there to get your custom etched slate coasters with your squadron logo and your call sign, or airplane instruments and your tail number, or any other organization. It's a nice custom gift for others as well. We have a glossary page, so if you heard a term on today's show that you didn't understand, go to the sothereiwas.us and log in and go to the glossary page. If it's not there, write to us at repeat@sothereiwas.us or fig@sothereiwas.us and tell us what you want on the glossary page. We'll get it there. Once you subscribe, you'll also be able to see a links page, which will take you to the video links that we have started recording. If you can listen on Apple Podcasts, go there and leave us a 5-star review, please. Not 4 stars, not 3, but 5. Thank you to Dave Hamilton, who's given us the technical know-how to do this show, and to Dos Gringos for their music. In the meantime, everybody, stay safe and check 6.
Take care.
In the world's smallest cockpit, on the tanker, through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond.
Discovery Houston, we've taken a look at the weather. Weatherman says it's going to hang in there. You have a go to pro to ops 302, go to maneuver to burn attitude, and a go for the burn.
Roger that. Go for the burn. Houston Discovery, we'll stop.
Roger that, Discovery. Welcome back. Congratulations on a super mission, and the world is looking forward to reaping the benefits of your good work over the next 15 years. Welcome back, guys, and we have no post-landing deltas.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and we sure enjoyed it also. It was great fun.